this is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast. Thanks for coming back. Part 2 of the Suffering of Self-Worth with Connor Furu is coming up right now. Stay tuned.
So after my football career ended, I didn't shed a tear.
That's surprising because that you put so much work into it for so long and had so many obstacles that you had to overcome. I mean, you put your self-worth into this.
Were you spent?
I was at peace. I think I fell into the bucket of the few people who really feel at the end of their career that they left everything they had out there. I had nothing else to prove. I proved everything I needed to myself, most importantly, but also to anyone, who was watching me.
It's almost impossible for me to, and don't take this the wrong way, to believe that you don't have any regret, because you have to think at times, God, if I wasn't so injury prone or had bad luck, I don't want to put a label on you, but you were injured more than anyone I've ever heard of. And I mean, are you?
Usually after the third or fourth, you stop.
I mean, so the regret part, and I'm just thinking about the way because I got a shitload of regret, right? It just in sports alone. But how would I could have been, I could have really done something here. I mean, you have to, that had to creep into your mind at times.
The thought for sure of, if I would have done this on this play instead, or, whatnot, it's a thought that I have as far as that could have led to another outcome. But that would imply that I'm not happy about how things ended and how my life has came before. And I would have never been put in a position now to come here or speak at high schools or colleges if I didn't have all those things happen.
That's a very noble thought. Yeah. I get that.
But your expectations going into freshman year at Drake, thinking, hey, if I do good enough, maybe something can materialize after college football. Meaning pros, Canada, wherever it may lead you. And then by your senior year or probably by your junior year, you kind of thought, okay, that's probably not going to happen. So now, I don't know, maybe you had a little bit of prep time. I don't know what was going through your head. Did you have that prep time in order to figure it out?
I always wanted to be a college football coach. I just wanted to be, I knew I wanted to take football as far as I could with it. But I always wanted to be what my coaches were for me. That was, my North Star, you might say. And when I got done, it was that chapter of my life is, over. I wasn't mad to close
the
that
book.
book.
Okay.
Yeah.
But here's the cool thing. Football is different to everybody, right? Sports, whatever sport it is, but football, because that's the room. So what was, if you think back, I'm not talking about you, not Connor as the collegiate athlete. I'm talking about Connor, the post-collegiate athlete. Now you start discovering what football really is to you. Yeah. So what is football to you at this point?
I think football was a vessel God gave me to learn what I needed to learn. I mean, I get to speak now at universities and high schools, and my offensive coordinator that I went to India with, he even said to me, the cool thing about your story is it's not a football story. It's God gave you the vessel of football to tell it, but someone who's an art student at NYU can relate it to whatever they, can in, whatever their football quote unquote is. Or, I've spoken to juvenile detention facilities where none of the kids played football, and it was just through the lens of football that I can, learn those lessons.
So even pro athletes, the ones who end and you still know, the ones who end, and the reason I know this is my pastor was just in here, right? Former NHL hockey player. Hockey was the backdrop. He just wrote a book called The Longest Game, right? And it's about the longest game that's ever played in the NHL between the Philadelphia Flyers, which he was playing on, and I think the Pittsburgh Penguins. Okay, it was almost 3 full games. It started at 7 p.m., ended at 3, and he tells this story about how to win at life by the lessons learned with the backdrop of that longest game. And I think that's what your life is doing now. You had that backdrop of football, which resonates with a lot of different people, but throughout there was many different lessons that you learned. So let's talk about those different lessons that football taught you coming up through the ranks.
Yeah. I think the first and foremost one being keeping promises, not to everyone, who you care about, who you make the promises to, but most importantly yourself. Because I was not a confident kid, but confidence really came when I was able to check the boxes of the promises I made to myself that I am who I say I am. and I'm a good person at heart, and I can, hang my hat on who I became, in the long run from it. I think first and foremost, that's the one glaring thing that sticks out to me.
Richie, what's football to you?
It's everything, man. It's the greatest game in the world because it teaches you the most about life, really. And I use so many analogies with the kids about life, with life, and like Connor's story speaks for itself. But everyone's got a story, some way that you can relate it to football. And to me, it's just the greatest vessel in the world to teach kids about life, brotherhood, family, adversity. So many discipline, so many things that you're gonna need to do in real life. And one example I've given to my kids many times, you're gonna have tough moments, guys. There's gonna be times where you got to pay the mortgage, and you got X amount of money in the account, and you're gonna have to buy food for the family too. What are you gonna do in that situation? Are you gonna just cry about it? And what are you gonna do? That happens in football, where we have moments where there's we have to make a big play or a big. It relates so much, and I talk about it all the time. And I say how this is the easy part. We're playing a game. At the end of the day, we're just playing a game. But you're gonna have those moments where you're talking to yourself only. And I always talk about this part with the kids too. Is those conversations, we all have them. The conversations that only you know what's going on because you're talking to yourself, your inner self, your soul.
It's the only person you're truly honest with.
That's so true, man. And to me, those are so important. And I address that with these kids because they're kids. They don't know. To me, that's so deep and big to have those teachable moments because you're going to need them again later in life. And football is that vessel. I love the way that you use that term, Connor, because it's so true. It's that vessel that we can go back to and say, hey, you know what? I dealt with some tough times in football. Whether it could be in practice. It doesn't have to be a game. Practice. You're working hard. We're doing something too much. Whatever. You're pushing through, and you got your brothers there, and they're cheering you on. Whatever it is, or maybe you don't. But no matter what in life, that's going to come again. And the vessel, man, is unbelievable because that game, football, it has all of the aspects of life to teach you. There's so many things. And just to go back on one thing we talked about earlier, you talked about how the term coach is so important. So I'm coach, right? If I'm not called coach, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Sometimes some of the students say, Mr. Torero, I say, my dad's here. Where's my dad? Here's where it's awesome for a guy like me that has that term all the time, right? When I coach kids in the All-Star game, like Bobby's son, and it's not just Bobby's son, tons of kids. This to me is the best. When I see those kids from other towns that I coach for 2 weeks, 6 practices in one game, and they see me and they say, hey, coach, or they call me coach, that's like, yo.
Crazy respect.
That's the cool, to me, and it happens all the time. And my wife even comments on it because she'll be like, how do you know that kid? Oh, well, I coached him in the All-Star game. I mean, kids that I coached against, kids that I knew their career because they would kill us or not or whatever, prepare for them. That, to me, as coach, when I get that from one of those kids that I stay in contact with kids that I coach for 6 days, man, one game in 6 days. That to me is everything.
Well, you're making an impact on their lives.
Football, 6 practices, one game. Football, you just said it. You're making an impact on their lives. The greatest vessel, dude. I love that Bobby got to experience it this year, and it's not me. It's us, and I put together a staff, and Bobby was awesome enough to be a part of it. 6 practices, again, I keep saying that. We became a family. Like it was, right? You came to practice. It was like you coached this team. I know these kids for 6 days.
Felt like we were coaching them for 6
an
months.
hour and a half, not intense, just, living with them, talking to them, getting to know them. Football, life, unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
Bobby.
Well, it's a love affair for me. And I think the biggest thing football has taught me as a coach is, and how that transcends to your players, is it teaches you how to fail.
Yeah.
And when you fail, how to pick yourself up and correct that, overcome that. And football's a great tool to teach you about all these life lessons. And that for football, for me, as a coach, I didn't have the playing career that you guys had, I wasn't fortunate enough to have that happen to me. You know, I played, but I wasn't
played
like
in
you.
3 more college games than you. If you.
But
wanna
I'm
put
just
it
saying,
that-
it's funny, but it's kind of sad too because you had a lot to give to the game, but it worked out for you. But my point is I look at it, the game of football, through a completely different lens as a coach. You know, it's just I love detail. I love those little things. I love it. And then I'll have someone like him come to me and say, community. He goes, you're so in touch with the community. He goes, you're so much more than just a coach. Yeah, you can coach defensive backs all day long. I love it.
Sure.
But I love where football's allowed me to reach more people. That's the thing that he was saying to me. And I didn't even realize it until he said it to me. I was like, wow.
Well, with Bobby, there's several times throughout the year that I would call him. I got a problem here. What do you think of this? You know, and he would give me his football knowledge. And then somehow it would always transcend into some sort of
Dirty thing?
Yeah.
Oh, no, my bad.
Well, that's how it starts. It would always transcend into some sort of teachable moment. But I think back, and it's very cliche, to the greatest football speech of any movie ever made, and it's got to be Any Given Sunday with Al Pacino, which Al Pacino knew nothing.
Peace with inches speech.
Peace with inches. He knew nothing about football, and his speech was written, and he did it in such a way. But God, if you tear apart that speech, you know, in life or football, those inches are everywhere. Those inches we need are everywhere around us. And you know, 1 second, and this speaks to your story too. You know, 1 second too late or too early, you don't quite catch it, and you know, you changed that play in high school, which changed some of the trajectory of your status as a collegiate player, and that was just that little inch to the here or to there.
Yeah.
And so if you can take football and those inches in football and you equate it to life, I mean, how many times as a cop, Bobby, if you showed up a half a second too late or too early, you're going to get hurt or somebody else is going to get hurt. You can count them in the thousands because they happen all over the place. So, and that's a lesson that's learned on the football field. And that's why I think football players, number one, they become coachable. If I know you played football, if I knew nothing about you and your personality, but I know you played football at the levels you played, I'm like, all right, we can work together because you're coachable. You know, whatever that job is, they often do better in employment because they're coachable, because they've played that game, because they've worked hard. So football, I think we're all in agreement. It is absolute life.
Core values are just they supersede all the other sports. And I played the other sports, you know, so I get it. But you're more of a unique situation. You're only 26 years old, and your life experience have developed you into. But you also have great character, because there's not a lot of 26-year-olds that I know personally, and I know plenty of them. I coached with a lot of them, and they all played. No, they played in college and everything, and they don't even come close to, you know, I can't say the word is character. You have some kind of deep rooted character, and it's because of your experiences, but it's also you're very mature. You know, for when he's talking about when he was 7 and 8 years old, no one thinks like that when they're 7 and 8 years old. And I get it, it's life experience, but hell, I went through terrible. I never thought like that. I thought like a 7 or 8 year old. Like you were thinking like a high school kid.
I think I was about 45 before I could start talking about the troubles in my youth. So you're far ahead of the curve.
Yeah, big time.
Well, that's a relatively new thing for me in the last, 2 or 3.
He did
4
say
years.
he didn't come out of his shell for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk, but I was very surface level. Like I could talk
Couple
with the best of
words.
them, but really, it was never really deep whenever I saw it, and I didn't really open up to that many people. And the reason why I started sharing my story was because I was in such the worst place I was mentally, where I thought to myself, I've been repressing my emotions. I've been not sharing my, my struggles and my pain for so long. Like, I'm just going to 180 flip this thing around and see what happens.
Do you
actually
feel
made,
like-
you
I'm
made that
sorry.
conscious decision to do that?
Yeah. So that's a whole.
I'm thinking like, are you an emotional? You weren't an emotional person, but you just can't flip that switch. If you're cold to something, you're cold.
Well-
like he's emotional. I can't be emotional like him. I'm not like he's talking about this game. If we talk about that Ramsey game right now, he'll go back to where it was. He'll go right back to that position. I'll see the look on his face where I'd be like, it's a game and I got to move on to the next thing, which he still does, but he keeps it inside.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny you say that because my mom had always phrased it to me like this whenever we were dealing with something with my dad, where I could just flip a switch and like become like emotionless, like where I could just kind of shut off and just, detach myself from situations.
That helps you with navigation, I would imagine.
Yeah. And what happened was why I started sharing was I got put into a situation after I got done playing where I didn't see my dad very much at this point, probably once a year. And he was living in my grandparents' old cabin, 100-year-old cabin in the mountains by himself. Hadn't had a job in a long time.
Is his last name Kaczynski?
No. No. Whenever I went to see my dad, usually it was around Christmas, I'd make him a meal because I always knew I like to cook, but whenever I cook for him, I knew he was putting something in his body that was good.
Is he still in full-blown addiction at this time?
Yes. Well, so I hadn't seen him in probably 9 months to a year or so at this point. And I get out to my grandparents' old cabin. Actually, that's a longer story where he wasn't answering my calls. We had scheduled this time for me to go out to see him. It was about a 2-hour drive. There's no cell service really, but I was calling him and he just wasn't responding over like a couple day period. And I was like, all right, I'm going out there. He knows I'm coming, whatnot. And I just started to get a really eerie feeling. And I'm driving out on these mountain roads or in the foothills of the Olympics out in Washington. And I was like, if my dad's dead for whatever reason, I'm not going to be the one to find him. I don't want to see my dad in that state. And so I call a wellness check on him. A cop drives out from the nearest town to this like mountain area. I pull off on the road for like 45 odd minutes until I get the call saying, hey, your dad's awake. Go out and see him. So I start hauling ass down this country road. I thought it was a 55 speed limit. I was going 65. Apparently it was a 25. And I get a cop drive past me and he flips around really quick, pulls me over. I roll down the window. He's pissed. He's like, why are you going so fast? And what the hell are you doing and whatnot? And I'm like, I'm sorry. I thought it was a rural road, whatever. And he's like, where's your license? So I give him my license and registration. And he goes, did you just call a wellness check on your dad? And I was like, yeah. And he handed back my registration license and said, get out of here. And so I was like, well, that could be a good or bad thing. So one, I'm about to walk into something really shitty and he knows it. And he just wants to do a good thing for me. That was what I was thinking. And I get there and I see my dad, who's unrecognizable from the guy that I had grew up knowing. He was completely bloated, extremely jaundiced. All of his skin was completely yellow. His eyes were completely yellow.
He's in the beginning stages of liver failure.
Yeah. And could hardly move. And this is in a cabin in the mountains, no heat, 100 years old, like January in Washington. And I get there and my mind goes to this 8-year-old kid again, just like sitting. I always used to sleep on the floor whenever I had to stay with my dad out in the living room. And he had a small little apartment and I had a bed in a back room, but I never slept there. I always slept on the floor right in front of the fireplace. And I only came to it recently where as a kid, it's not that I couldn't have been comfortable in that environment. I could have gone to my bed, but I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be comfortable in the environment that he was providing. And so I get there, and I see my dad. I walk in with a steak and some Brussels sprouts that he liked I was going to make for him. And I didn't know what to do. I just shut down and I start making this food and he's just laying there on the couch, not really doing anything. He can't really move all that much. And he keeps asking me, when's the food going to be ready? When's the food going to be ready? I was like, oh man, Dad, you must be hungry. And he was like, no, I'm cold. Like his body was shutting down all of his
organs.
Yeah. And I ran out and I started crying because he wasn't asking me for food because he was warm. He had no food in the house. There was Spam everywhere. Like,
that's not a bad thing.
No, I know, but like it was an inhospitable place to live. Like it was terrible. And basically he had a doctor's appointment the following day. And part of me wanted to go take him to the hospital right then and there. And I regretted not in that moment. I basically, after I made my dad some food, I made a fire for him and pushed the couch close to the fire and, made him enough to keep it going until I told him he said, I'll drive there in the morning to go to the doctor. And I was like, okay. And then I'm driving home, I'm screaming, I'm going down this straight stretch, just hauling ass, even though I almost just got a ticket about 4 or 5 hours before on this road. And I pull over and I'm just screaming because I know that I need to do something, but I don't want to. I'm that 8-year-old kid who didn't really know how to cope.
Well, before you go any further,
Yeah.
This is kind of an odd question. Do you feel some sort of implicit guilt for what's going on with your father, or how your father is at this point?
Yeah.
Now, today. The reason I say that is I'm a student of body language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm watching how you're telling this story. Your head's down, you're looking at the ground. And when there's portions of my story when I tell it, that's how I tell it, because that's the only way I know how. Okay, and it was brought to my attention, and I'm watching that in you, and for everything bad that your father has done, and I don't know any of it. He's still a human being.
Mm-hmm.
He's still a man. He's still your father. And I know it's an odd question, and I don't mean to take you off track, but we all sort of feel some implicit guilt for the sins of others, especially when we watched all that stuff happen.
The key component to any law enforcement officer being the best version of themselves is through education. Sherry Alsop is a leader in providing that education to police agencies, preparing them for the all too frequent dealings with sexual assault victims.
You've seen Sherry on episode 169 of the Suffering Podcast. She survived incest and almost daily sexual assault, so she comes from a place of experience and true understanding.
Sherry has the intelligence, commitment, and compassion to open the eyes of those on the front lines, while providing the tools to effectively deal with a difficult situation. Sherry's instruction comes from experience and multiple certifications.
Training with Sherry will offer on-site training, customized schedules, specialized instruction tailored from a victim's perspective.
You are going to hear Sherry's heart-wrenching but inspiring survivor story. Learn proprietary trauma-informed training techniques, uncovered victim-centered interview methods while earning continuing education credits according to your state guidelines. To be the best, you must learn from the best. Let Sherry also guide you through the delicate cases of sexual assault from a victim's point of view.
Be a source of comfort to those victims affected by these traumatic experiences while producing a solid investigation and uncovering details that often go unnoticed.
To find out more or to contact Sherry Alsop, go to sherryalsop.com. That's SherryAllsup.com.
It's so strange that you're asking me this question, because my coach, who I refer to, Reggie Gaither, who was like my dad growing up, he texted me 3 days ago asking me that question that no one else had, that do you feel guilty about your relationship with your dad? And I do. I have a tendency to bear burdens that aren't mine, and partially mine, but I always thought, if I was a good enough example, or I was a good enough son, or I was a good enough reason for him to stop, that he would.
Yeah.
And to me, when I was screaming driving down this road, everyone talks about grief when you lose someone, but no one ever talks about grief when you lost the version of someone you wish you had. And I knew in that moment my dad was never going to be the person I need. Like, any hope of that was gone. And so there's probably a small part of me of, what did I do wrong where he didn't give up his addiction?
Maybe it was you wanted to do more, but you just didn't know how.
Yeah. And
watch any rape victim, watch any victim of child sexual assault. They all say the same thing. Okay. They all say, in the beginning, they all say, well, I should have done this better, or I should have done this better. They take the blame on that stuff.
It's everywhere in this room right now, regardless. Your story is your story. Right there. All three of us have guilt because he killed himself. And we all feel that we could have did something. We should have recognized a sign. As was just said, we just had the conversation. We've had countless times. Everybody has that guilt, but in your heart that, chances are it happened already. There's nothing you can do now, but you can't go backwards.
What that eventually, this whole thing led to with my dad, was I took him to the hospital. We dropped him off there thinking that he was going to be admitted. I actually ended up going home. and the hospital near where he was living said, "We're not equipped to handle this. Your dad's dying, end stage liver failure. Like, we can't keep him. Like, go make him comfortable at home." Like, he's
Hospice?
yeah. And so I didn't accept that. And it goes back to in football, I knew I had something left in the tank, and I wasn't going to be able to live with myself, not for his sake, but because I knew I had an opportunity to do something that if I didn't try to do it, that I would regret it from the future for my future kids' sake. And things like that. So I end up driving up to Olympia, which was about an hour and a half drive from where he was in the less advanced hospital. Took him up to a better hospital. Me and my sister ended up, between the both of us, sitting in the ER waiting room for 17 hours while it was overran by COVID patients and all this stuff. And actually on the way to the hospital, we had to buy him alcohol because he started going through withdrawals in the car. And when we got there, the doctors gave him medicine to wean off, but there was at some point during that ER waiting stay, he didn't recognize me when he looked at me. And after 17 hours, we ended up getting him back into a hospital bed in a hallway because they were just so overrun. And I ended up going to a cafeteria, getting some coffee just to debrief for a bit, or just calm down for a little bit. And I make it back to the hallway just in time for shit to break loose. And I don't know if it was his body's last amount of energy to fight back, but I saw him sat up in the bed and he was swinging and trying to push nurses off him and do all this stuff, still not recognizing who I am. And all the security was handling homeless people outside. And so I saw myself in a position where physically, and these tiny nurses trying to restrain him, that I was the only person in this situation that could restrain my father. So I sprint over, basically tackle him, pin him down, pin him against the wall, as he's like still trying to fight me. And I look into his eyes and he doesn't recognize me. I can tell, like he didn't have any recollection. And I just looked and I saw my grandfather. I saw my uncle. My uncle died of liver failure. My uncle was a mean drunk, my grandfather was an alcoholic. And in that moment, I was completely calm. Like I had always been very good at handling my emotions in very high tense situations, just growing up in them. But in that moment, I was completely calm. I was instructing nurses what to do and everything. And then doctors came after probably about 5-10 minutes. Doctors and security, they ripped me off my dad, take me outside. And then I broke down emotionally after the fact. But in the moment, I was able to deal with it. And I was the only one in that moment that could. And because of that, I believe that everything that football led me to do through all my injuries, through all my discipline I developed, was an ability to overcome the literal physical manifestation of a century worth of addiction, mental illness, in my family. And I'm, in a very strange way, extremely grateful for it.
So Bobby will attest to this. Alcohol is not the problem. All right. Alcohol is the remedy of the problem, because most alcoholics do not see themselves as alcoholics until the alcohol stops. Then all of a sudden, when your body starts needing it, then, him and I have both been to rehab, and we've seen some people wheeled in that you're like, damn, man, they just reek and they bleed alcohol and they can't live without it. It's as essential to them as air, but it's a medication. It's a temporary Band-Aid for something else going on. Did you ever find out what that is for your father? Or was that his culture, how he grew up? Because if his father was like that,
it was very much a culture. But this was my ability to remove the resentment I had, because when I saw my father and I had that situation with him in the hospital, I realized no one in their right mind would choose to live like this. And I started to think back, or looking at my family in third person, where, okay, what led my dad to get to this point? What led my uncle to get to the point where he died of liver failure? What led my grandfather to get to that? And, I look back, and my great-grandfather died when my grandfather was like 10 years old. And so, that could be the rosebud, the bud that, sprouted everything else. I don't know.
I don't think you're ever going to find out a reason why an alcoholic is an alcoholic.
Yeah.
It's a futile pursuit. And alcohol does consume you.
Yeah.
If you give it an opportunity to. But there's a lot of mental things that have to happen for that. You have to be running away from something or hiding something or suppressing something, and you're using it as a tool to do that. At some point, it just consumes you.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky enough, you make the move and you ask for help. And then after that, you can try to help others.
Yeah.
But so it's not the everyday person that gets the opportunity. Like Bobby and I have had an opportunity to cure that need.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby, to a much greater extent than I am. He was much worse alcoholic than I am, so I'm not going to take the trophy on that one.
Yay.
No, but it's so I am grateful for the opportunity. Did your father ever get that opportunity to get off alcohol?
So we were talking to hospice in the days after, thinking that he only had days to live. My dad still is alive today, and that was 3 years ago.
I'm waiting for you to tell me he died. No offense, but he's still alive?
Yeah, he lives in an assisted living home.
Okay.
We were talking to hospice doctors.
Liver transplant?
No.
Just had enough left in it to rejuvenate,
No,
huh?
it's still in bad shape. Like,
But enough for him to stay alive.
Yeah, it's enough for him to stay alive, and there's no reason doctors say that he should be alive. But the reason I want to share the story, one, because it's a large part of my story, but it leads into me speaking, and from that, the day that happened with my father, I had I met with my mom after. I was running on like 4 hours of sleep in like 48 hours as everything was unfolded. And my mom reminded me of a promise I had made to my nieces that I was going to take a Dollhouse up to their place in Seattle, which was like a 3-hour round trip. It's like an hour and a half each way. And I'm running on like 4 hours of sleep and I'm just drained. And she's like, the kid, they probably won't even remember, but you did promise them and that it would be up by the end of the week. And it's Saturday, or it was Sunday at the time. And so I was like, no, this is God put me in a position. I said when I tore my ACL the first time that I was going to put everything towards it so I would not give up on my promises later in life. And I ended up doing that. And I ended up taking the Dollhouse up to my nieces, not knowing if they'd ever remember it. And when I got there, I was talking with my older sister, debriefing her about what was going on. And I hear my youngest niece say, my uncle promised, from the other room with her friends, my uncle promised that he was going to bring the Dollhouse up. And today was the last day of the week. And I just started crying in the kitchen. And I started going through, I had a very rough week after that. Like that was an epiphany moment for me, but I had such a terrible week just mentally with my dad thinking he was going to die at any time. We were going to get a call, like all this stuff, where that was when I told myself I needed to just go speak somewhere. Cause what I've been doing for the last 22 years or 23 years at this point has not been working for me. And a week after the whole ordeal with my dad, I reached out to my old high school and I went to speak about what I was going through in real time.
Aside from your speaking, your relationship with your father, he's been alive for 3 years after you thought the end was near.
Mm-hmm.
Have you made some sort of connection or some sort of amends with him?
We have a very surface level relationship. He, because of his state, he actually, it's odd. It's almost somewhat like he goes in and out of good consciousness and like good mental clarity. And so it's almost as if like like an alcohol induced dementia. It's odd.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Did you forgive him?
Oh, I've forgiven my father. Yeah. I'll tell you why. When I was and it leads into it, but when I was coaching for 1 year, at my university, when I thought I was going to be a coach before I realized I couldn't live off tuna fish and low income housing.
Neither can Rich.
There was a kid who tore his ACL, and having gone through all the things, he came up to me and was like, dude, I tore my ACL. It was after we played North Dakota. And I was like, I will say I empathize with you. I feel for you, but I don't feel bad for you, because that would imply I don't think that you're going to be better off in the long run. You might not be a better football player, but why would I be sorry for you if I think you're going to be better off because of it? And I know my kids, because I went through what I went through, will never have to go through what I did or experience a fraction of what I did, because I saw the worst of it.
The only reason to feel sorry for a kid in that situation would be that he is not getting what he thinks he wants. But we all know that a 18, 19, 20-year-old thinks they know what they want.
Yeah.
They don't.
I thought I did.
I was very smart at 20 years old. Now, being 50 years old, I was very stupid at 20. So you think you have it all together. I mean, even you included. We all sit around here. We all think we had it
I
wrapped
started
up.
setting goals, like real goals, in my 50s.
Yeah.
So I'm 58 years old, and I started setting when I got sober. That's when I really started setting goals. I was like, wow, look at all that time I wasted. You know, I mean,
But
you can't get that back.
But to contradict you a little bit there, you needed to go through all of that stuff. You needed to go through all of that stuff.
It's your path.
Right? It's how you got to where you are. You would not be speaking at these places had you not had all this adversity and all this stuff thrown your way. It's you were being, we said it in the beginning, you were being prepped.
Yeah.
In order to do something that you're meant to do.
Yeah.
And it's crammed into a window of 26 years, more like 23, and then you're getting a grip and you're becoming the person you are now the last 3 years. You know what I mean? But in that small period of time with all the football and everything else, your father, you know, everything pulling you in all these different directions and staying focused, that's probably why you are where you are today.
You developed the self-worth.
Yeah.
That's what you did. You developed a self-worth.
Yeah.
And it's a short road for you. And God, I'm actually so jealous that you did it in 26 years. It took me a long time. I'm stuck. I'm just slow.
You could just look at your forehead and see that.
I'm just slow.
You know, I love you.
Lift up your hat. Come on, your forehead's bigger than
No,
mine.
my forehead is not bigger than that.
Yes, it
First
is.
of all, that's like a billboard on 280.
Your forehead goes to your back of your neck.
Secondly, it's like a map. Remember when they used to take the map out on vacation back in the 70s? Hey, where are we going? Get the map out.
I always like had this envision of like a stereotypical like Jersey friend group, and you guys are just living up. To it.
100%.
Oh well,
100%.
and this is on the show. You should see.
It's actually worse in person. But just a little side note: there's people that'll reach out to me on social media saying, "I want to be around you guys together." That's Tom Flynn, Bobby, and my other friend Mike. And Tom puts it purposely. He's like, "You're going to regret that decision the minute you come out.
Yeah.
You will regret it." You have this new clarity. You're going out and speaking, but you're in the beginning. You said it was surface. You weren't diving deep,
Yeah.
right? So when did you start diving deep?
About 18 months ago or so, where I told my story how it was, but at the same time, I left things out that I was shameful of or regretted.
Mhm.
For a perfect example, when I went to speak at my university, after I had got done playing and coaching and whatnot, and that was 18 months, 2 years into me speaking, was the first time I told the story of me pushing the sophomore kid aside my senior year of high school to
Were you kind of ashamed of that?
I was 100% ashamed. I told my coach Gaither, who was like one of the closest people in my life, that story about 6 months ago. Like there are aspects where I find that there, as much as I think I'm really vulnerable, there's like another layer of stuff where it's like, why aren't I sharing that bit? And I have to kind of reflect and analyze, why am I not doing that? And I think I'll always find those little things because, I want to break down those walls of vulnerability. I'm not someone who says you need to go share your feelings with every single person that you come across. But a perfect example is I think vulnerability replicates the environment it's, released in. So if you go to a bar and you're talking about how shitty your life is with a bunch of other people who have shitty lives, it's just going to exasperate the issue. But if you guys all go out for a cup of coffee and you guys are having struggles in just life in general, that is a vulnerable environment that produces strength, not weakness. And so when I go talk to kids in high school kids or college kids or a juvenile detention center, I believe those are people who are trying to get better. And that's a powerful and positive environment.
It's also very therapeutic for you.
Yeah.
Anytime you're helping someone else,
Yeah.
you're doing it for yourself, unbeknownst sometimes that you're walking away feeling better
Yeah.
because you're doing something. That's all a circle.
I didn't realize how strong I actually was until I started letting it out and became vulnerable. And Bobby got after me for something. Something happened in my life where I'm not very proud of it, and I let it out on social media. Like I spilled the guts. And I remember getting a message from him because he looks out, as much as he breaks my balls, he looks out for me, and as my other friends do. And he said, I really don't agree with that, and I understand why you do. You know which one I'm talking about,
Exactly.
right?
I know exactly what it
Okay.
is.
Do you have a different view of it? Because I explained why I did this.
I do now.
You do now.
Because my thought is, hey, listen, it's social media, right? And you have all these other people looking in on you, and you have this reputation here that you're doing something really good.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want it to take or work against him, be counterproductive to what he does, because he does an amazing job at this, and he helps a lot of people. That's what it's all about. And I felt like this particular incident was going to hurt him. And then he articulated it to me how he really thought. And he was very direct, and he was adamant about it. There was no like, well, maybe it was just, Bobby, this is the way it is, and I did this, and what's done is done. And you know what? I've said that same words because I let things go. Hey, listen, I fuck up all the time. Make bad decisions. I own bad decisions. If I got paid for it, I wouldn't be here right now. You know what I mean? My house would be burning down in LA because I'd have a mansion. No, seriously. So I was like, okay, Kevin, gotcha. And you know what? I thought about it, and I said, yeah, he's right. He's right.
I ask people like you to come in and bare your soul. I do. So my thought process was what a hypocrite I would be if I wasn't willing to give the same thing. My social media is very authentic. There's only like a couple things that I leave out just because I know this, that I am not ready to speak about them openly. Some really dark shit in my past. So that's my mode of thinking. So for you, when you came to that place of vulnerability, I mean, it had to be freeing. The Suffering Podcast welcomes our newest sponsor, Keto Revive. Ketamine infusions that are personalized, accessible, and holistic. Proven treatments for post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, chronic pain, neuropathic pain, and so much more. Keto Revive is physician-operated with customized treatments tailored to you and an outstanding support system. Keto Revive offers first responder special discounts. So try something new, proven treatments, located in Wyckoff, New Jersey. To find out more, visit Keto Revive at ketorevive.com. Let's start healing today.
It was freeing and frustrating because I realized how, and to your point, you had to go through all those things to get to that point, but I realized like how much energy was wasted over the years worrying about things and having such a high level of anxiety where, I mean, my anxiety growing up as a kid was so high. I remember if my mom was, late home from work this was back when kids didn't have cell phones and stuff. Like if my mom wasn't home, 30 minutes where she generally was, like my mom's gone. She died in a car accident and everyone's getting she always called me the worrier, but that's really what I was. I had so much pent up anxiety that I didn't have to do anything, didn't know what to do with, that it was such a freeing feeling when I allowed myself permission to share the things I went through.
I really think that the journeys kind of coincide with everybody's issues, whatever it is. So yours aren't really self-inflicted in a sense that you never were a bad person. You're a really good person. You really are. From my perspective, you're a very good person. You beat yourself up. You caused these things, anxiety, decisions, your family, some of that stuff. But you persevered more than most. Where I wasn't a good person, I have a good core, I have a good heart, but I did a lot of bad things, and I would imagine same thing for you. And I would imagine I know that you've experienced bad things in your life, so they kind of define who we are if we get to this side of the fence. You know what I mean? You're getting there really early. It took us, me and him, a little while longer, but when you get to that other side where you have purpose, you have direction, you had yours early on.
Yeah. I think I was blessed to be in an environment where my mom was never someone who spanked us or hit us or anything. However, if I got in trouble at school, I was not as worried about what was going to happen at school as what it was what was going to happen when I went home. Or in high school, I mean, the three most important guys in my life in my time who were my football coaches: parole officer, cop. And if I got in trouble doing
discipline,
yeah, but I knew that, that I just couldn't mess up because I knew the path that others had gone, and I wanted to be the opposite of it so bad. I'm not saying I've made stupid ass mistakes. I've had my bad moments for sure. But at the same time, it's weird that you're almost grateful for the examples, the bad examples as much as the good, because you can learn from them.
Oh, it's football, right?
Yeah.
So you show me a kid who loses, all right, and winning's easy. Everybody knows how to win.
Yeah.
There's no training for winning. But when they lose, that's when I watch my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I will watch all my players. I will watch them all, because the minute you lose and I see you, that's going to tell me everything I need to know about you and what I need to work on, if I can work on it.
Yeah.
Kids are going to throw tantrums, throw their helmets. I have this thing, you don't abuse your equipment. You abuse your equipment, and there was hard and fast rules. You throw your helmet, you're sitting half a game. I don't care if you're the best player, because it's not about that. Yeah. So that's where the life lessons come in.
I guarantee all you guys have said this at some point, just because every coach of mine had, but I took it such to heart, and I think it's why I learned from mistakes pretty quickly. Is that my coach in college, Todd Stepsis, he's now the coach at Northern Iowa, a phenomenal guy. Couldn't be happier for him that he just got the job. But he always said that if you're going to make a mistake, just do it really fast, just as hard as possible, right? Where it's if during the play you forget what you're doing, just do it full speed.
Sure.
Sure. What I think is so important in life that I was able to do is that I failed quickly, and then I learned, and I didn't repeat that mistake because I didn't relish and think about it. It's just, instincts. You mess up, you fix it. And I think that's one of probably the most important lessons, to go back to the question earlier, is that's a huge thing for me as well.
So we're getting near the end, and let's say you had a chance to go back in the 26-year-old body to speak to Connor, the 7-year-old. What is one thing you think that might change the trajectory of his life if you were to tell him something?
Bubble wrap.
Replace your knees as preventative.
I don't know I don't know how effective steroids are to 7 or 8 year olds.
I think it would work.
Yeah, maybe get on the Herschel Walker push-ups and pull up.
Yes, he had something else going on.
Yeah. I would say it's a hard thing, because actually someone asked me this question not too long ago, and part of me thinks I don't know if I would say anything, because I think I needed to learn it and not skip over those things.
By the way, that was what I was waiting for you to say.
Yeah.
I swear to God, I was throwing up a softball for you, because you don't need to say anything.
Yeah. And I think my life in so many ways has, a reason why it's such a huge part of what I talk about and when I speak at high schools, universities, is Romans 5:3-4, the suffering in general. You have to go through it. It's like the analogy of the buffalo, if you've ever heard that. It's
herd up or scatter.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I say it all the time. You've heard me say it.
Yeah. But
I have.
There's a reason, you get through the storm faster if you go through head on. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a couple ways to approach it. You can either, run from the storm. Running from your demons doesn't allow you to get away from it. Just makes you too tired to fight when they catch up. Mm-hmm. Sitting down and just waiting it out, you just hope the storm isn't powerful enough not to kill you. But running into it is, at least you get done faster. And I think that was kind of my mindset with all my injuries and stuff too. Is just we can't change anything about it now. Just get going.
Just a fancy way of saying you own it.
Yeah.
So where can our audience find you?
Mostly Instagram. I mean, I try my best to do other things as far as social media, but really Instagram. I don't have a ton of time to do everything. And also I write a weekly newsletter that I share on Instagram and things as well. I share anecdotes, I share stories about my experiences, existential topics about maybe life, death, grief, what have you. That's probably a better way to get a window into my mind from a longer 5-minute read on a Sunday. But
and is it Connor _ Furu, or is just Connor Furu?
Connor_Furu.
Okay.
But yeah, Instagram, I'm super easy to get in touch with.
I can attest.
Yeah.
I can attest. Listen, Connor, you have an amazing story. Richie, thank you so much for coming in. Bobby, it's sometimes a pleasure. Today it was a pleasure.
It's not nice.
I always love you, bud. But you have an amazing story. You have an amazing journey. And here's the cool part. At your age, your story is just starting to get written. And by the time, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of most people by the time you hit 30.
I hope so, because as much as I enjoy speaking at high schools and colleges and whatnot, and I will as long as I can, if I'm sharing, and it'll be a part of my story, but if I'm sharing the same story about what I did in college when I'm 45 years old, I haven't lived much life after the fact, I feel like. But, I hope to keep on, keep on sharing my story, keep on,
It will all evolve.
Yeah.
It evolves. Each passing month, year, it just, your evolution of you will be different at 45.
Yeah. And I got to thank you guys for, allowing me to have on. I think it was so serendipitous, like I said in the beginning.
I don't even know what the hell that means. Can someone
it's like the
explain to me?
stars
I saw
align.
the damn movie.
The stars align.
She's dancing at the bar. Serendipity? Yeah, she's going to dance at the bar later on. Yeah.
That's what I'm
that's
talking
her.
about.
That's her.
But
just joking.
It's such a. It's such a pleasure to come out and see Rich again. I know, it's always good to see him, and then now that we're all connected,
it's awesome. Like just the way it all came together.
We messaged one week, and then next I'm having pizza and with your kids and your players.
That's
and
it,
stuff.
man. My wife came.
You should come out for the All-Star game, right? You should come out for the All-Star game. You get to see him in his glory. It's tough, dude. It's tough. You get blamed for everything. He's like, what the hell's going on? Not me. Nah, nothing like that.
It's the best.
My son gave him the best. My son, and I give my son a prop here. I think my son was one of the best receivers in this area. He really was. And
100%.
He loved the All-Star game. He says to me, I wish he was my high school coach.
That's awesome.
He goes, because I could play for him.
That's everything.
And I'm like, yeah, he'd be throwing a ball to you every chance he can get. He's like, he's just
All-Star
awesome.
Game, I'll tell you that.
He's just awesome. He loved his energy. It's the energy. It's really the energy. Yeah.
The one thing in this room, I think that binds us all is you have some sort of passion. And that passion, Rich, I've never watched you coach, but I know your passion for football. Bobby, I know your passion from a lot of things, but football in general. And Connor, I think you now have a passion for life, right? I think passion for redevelopment of that self-worth that you didn't have when you were 7, but there was a reason you didn't have it. You weren't ready for it. Now you're ready for it. So, like I said, we are coming to the end of this thing, and I always end every show the same way. You've learned all these different lessons. You've gone through a fair amount of suffering with injuries and growing up in the household that you did, and then watching your father go through this horrible affliction, but it's had to taught you something. Because if suffering doesn't teach anything, it's a wasted opportunity. So what do you think all this suffering has taught you?
It's not an answer, it's 2 questions. First of which being, would your younger self thank you for the life that you created or the life that you're leading? And then based on your question or your answer to number 1, what would your younger self want you to do next?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
It's pretty insightful.
My younger self would never believe that I came out somewhat adjusted. Just wouldn't happen. Connor, I thank you so much for coming in. Richie, always a pleasure, and you're always welcome back.
Thank
Bobby,
you,
you come in whenever you want.
What did we learn today?
We will be learning something in just a second. Thank you all very much. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Suffering Podcast, The Suffering of Self-Worth with Connor Furu, Part 2. And let's think about all the stuff that we learned. Serendipity puts you where you need to be. A good coach watches as much as they teach. You find out how bad you want it. We often hold guilt for the sins of others. When you make a mistake, make it fast. But most importantly, keep your promises. And that's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to go to popple.com, put in the code TSP20 for a 20% discount on your digital business card. Follow us on all social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, OnlyFans. Follow me at Real Kevin Donaldson, and of course, follow the Suffering Podcast. We'll see you on the next episode.